who has been living in Germany off and on since the 1980s and has written a book arguing that Britain and America have a lot to learn from the way the country has come to terms with its past. In her book, Learning from the Germans, Susan Neiman argues that unless other countries confront their pasts properly, populism and racial violence are inevitable. And she's with me now. Very weighty subjects indeed. That was a very rough summary. Just tell me what you're saying, really, what your central argument is.
Sure. I think there's three things that we can learn from the Germans, from their confrontation with the Nazi period. One is that it's really hard and that there will be always a lot of resistance to anyone's facing their parts of the past that were criminal and horrible. I think from the outside, most people think that what happened in 1945, as soon as the war was over, the Germans fell to their knees and recognized what they've done and begged the world to apologize. It's not the case at all, but we tend to think of Nazi as simply being a substitute word for evil in a very broad and very mysterious sort of way. Actually, there was a lot of resistance, and the Germans thought of themselves at the time as the world's worst victims. Not only were their cities destroyed and millions of their people lost, they were now being blamed for the war. So it took decades and a change of generations for even the Germans to face up to their criminal past. That's the first thing, which means that everywhere we go where a nation is examining itself, and we do have wars over history in both America and Britain, we shouldn't be discouraged by the fact that there are people who are going to resist it. Of course people will resist it, and nevertheless it's important. And that is the second thing that one can learn from the Germans, is that you can go through an examination of your of the less savory aspects of your past and come out better for it as a nation.
But you're drawing a parallel, as I understand it, to imperialism.
Yes.
And seems to me that they're very, very different things.
Of course they are.
And that in Germany's case, Germany really didn't have the option, if you like, because Germany was put on trial after the war. I mean, literally, the Nuremberg trials and in public opinion, whereas imperialism is much longer ago. It didn't come to a conclusion. You know, it's still, by and large, it wasn't based around, you know, a genocide or indeed a push for world domination.
I'm sorry, I thought the sun never set on the British Empire. If that's not world domination, I don't know what is. I'm not suggesting that that was the same thing as the Nazis, but certainly a form of domination is the case. Secondly, or was the case, secondly, my recollection of history is that actually colonialism ended after the Second World War. So we're not talking about something that happened very long ago. We're actually talking about something that's closer to us in time. Now, of course, it's not the same thing. No two historical events are ever alike. But when we focus only on the end point of Nazi genocide and don't look at other aspects, we miss the whole picture. And of course...
So what are you saying that we should be doing about colonialism?
And that is the third point that we can learn from the Germans. There's not a recipe for doing it right. East Germany and West Germany did it very differently, for example. East Germany initially more successfully, but both of them did things wrong. And it needs to be done in a variety of ways. It needs to be done by looking at textbooks and how history is taught in school. It needs to be done through thinking about the archaeology of our cities, what kinds of statues we put up.
You mean knocking down statues? Yeah.
So once again, I'm not arguing that every statue needs to be knocked down. Some of them do, and every single case needs to be discussed. In some cases, contextualization is a much better solution rather than simply knocking down pieces of the past.
Well, how about Nelson's column, which has become symbolic of this argument in this country?
You know, what's important to me is not to make pronouncements about any particular piece of history, but to have, first of all, have community input into the process. And secondly, to be aware that we don't simply put up monuments to valorize a piece of history as history. We do it because it symbolizes certain values. It might be possible, in many cases, to keep a piece of iconography that's become valuable when there's been a debate about exactly what it symbolizes and what it means, or if there are other statues put up valorizing other pieces of the history. Once again, there are no recipes even with a single, within a single country, but what is important is that those nuanced, complicated, ambivalent pieces of a past be analyzed. I've compared this, because I also wrote a book about growing up, to having a grown-up relationship to your parents. As a child, you usually believe everything that your parents told you. As an adolescent, you also want to reject many things your parents told you. And becoming a grown-up involves sorting that out and looking at those things that you're actually glad you took from your parents and those things that you'd rather do without.
Indeed, it is a fascinating subject. Learning from the Germans, Confronting Race and the Memory of Eagle is by Susan Neiman, is out now. That's all.